Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. How you say your name?
Rami.
Rami. Okay. Nice to meet you, Rami.
Pleasure meeting you, Doctor. Am I saying your last name right? Is it Quarles?
Quarles? Yeah, it's like arguing with people, basically. Quarles.
Quarles. I like
Yeah.
it. Sounds very British.
It is British.
How are you, my friend? It's a pleasure to meet you, and it's an honor
Yeah, it's
to
good to
get to
meet you
talk
too.
to you. So before we get started, I just want to make sure it's okay. I record this. I plan on posting it
Mhm.
on YouTube, and that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure, it's fine.
I know you're already a bit of an internet personality. You're famous. You've already been interviewed.
Yeah.
And
I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe. I
yeah.
don't know. I wouldn't know.
No, I did I tried to do my research a little bit. I looked you up. I think you had a talk with, I guess it's more of like a tech related YouTube channel talking about your research, and that was pretty interesting. So got a little brief synopsis of like your biography and stuff, but we'll probably rehash
Gotcha.
all that. You probably are tired of repeating it, but hopefully you
That's
won't.
fine. Whatever you, whatever you need. I don't mind.
Yeah, man. I like the decorations in the back too.
Oh, thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You built all
I
those?
collect a lot of things. What's that?
You built all the figures?
No, actually, they're all transformers. Some of them, so they're you just transform them. Some of them I do have a 3D printer that I have customized quite a few of them, but most of them are just transformers.
That's
So they're not
cool.
like they're not Gundams. They're transformers.
Gotcha. I thought some of them they looked almost kind of Lego-y, so I thought maybe you built them or something, but no.
I
And
have a bunch of Legos in the other room, not in this
uh,
room.
gotcha, gotcha. Okay, Dr. Quarles. So I guess we'll start. Like they say, begin at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your life and how you became who you are today. Like where you grew up,
Oh,
that sort of
okay.
thing. Yeah.
You really want to start at the beginning?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. Uh, my dad was a physics professor at Texas Christian University. He's retired now, but I think he was. I mean, he was a professor there for over like 50 years or something like that. So I kind of grew up with uh, having a pretty good idea of what professor work was like in a way. I mean, at least I thought I had a pretty good idea.
Mm.
um, he would take me to the lab sometimes, his lab, and it was pretty fun. Sometimes he would pay me to do various things, not like physics experiments, but more like organize his papers and things. Because at that time, all the papers were like it was literally paper. Now it's all digital, right? So I don't need to do that anymore. Uh, but I think that was pretty instrumental. Like he seemed to have a pretty fun job. Like, my dad basically uh, shot positrons at things and then saw what happened, and then so that seemed pretty fun. I didn't really, but I also liked video games a lot. I played a lot of video games by myself, but also with my dad. And so I got kind of into computers, at least from a gaming perspective, pretty early on. Um,
So tell me a
we
little bit
probably had
about
the internet before other people. Like we had the internet,
yeah.
early '90s is about as early as you could really get a dial-up version of the internet. I think.
Yeah. So tell me, sorry to cut you off there, but I'm
Oh, no, no, no.
interested.
You want me to start from the beginning? It's gonna be a long story.
Yeah. No, no worries. I wanted to kind of dig in a little bit more there
Yeah,
about your dad being a professor and how
yeah.
you said you kind of grew up understanding that work and that kind of molding you. I don't know if you're familiar with David Foster Wallace at all. I think his dad was a philosopher. He was a professor of philosophy, and he sort of talks about the same thing, kind of growing up around that. But he kind of talked about it from the side of like he grew up kind of maybe being weary of that side of work because of the like mundane nature of like adult life type work. But I guess so. I'm curious as
No,
to
it's kind of the opposite for me.
yeah. So like
Like
from a young
my
age, you
my
were
dad's lab was weird. It
yeah,
was a pretty unique place where there was just like weird stuff that you would never see anywhere else. They had very specialized equipment, and he had this whole closet full of just weird parts and junk and that was from previous experiments that he had done or whatever. So it always seemed pretty exciting to me.
Mm.
My funny enough though, like my mom was an artist, and I think she was originally her degree is in like graphic arts or something like that. But most of what she did when I was growing up was painting. She still does that quite a
Wow.
bit.
Yeah.
Uh, I never got into painting, but I got into art. So for a very long time, I wanted to be an artist or some sort of an artist.
And I think what
It
you do
wasn't
kind of combines the best of both worlds, though,
well.
right?
It kind of does. It
Yeah.
kind of does in a way,
Yeah.
right? So I figured out that well, I'm not going to really make a very good living as an artist. So then I started shifting more into computer art,
Mm.
right? And so as I was shifting into computer art, and then I took a programming class in high school, and I was like, hey, this is actually really fun.
Mm.
And so that's where I decided to that I might want to do computer science as a profession. And I had thought about doing professor stuff at that point, but I wasn't 100% sure because I wanted to do some try some more. I thought maybe I'd want to make video games, right? Or maybe I would want to be an audio engineer because at the same time I was doing a lot of music and I still do a lot of music. Uh, but I went and I got into uh, to University of Texas after high school, University of Texas Austin after high school, and I did actually think about doing radio, TV, film for a minute so that I could do audio engineering type stuff. But I think I decided that even though that was really fun, I really felt like I needed someone like actually like teacher. I felt like I could probably do that on the side if I wanted to, but I felt like computer science was hard enough to where I really wanted to spend time having people teach me how to do it.
Mm.
You know, uh, and I mean the same is true for audio engineering, but I always found it much more. I don't know. I always found it easier than say than computer science. I feel like there's a lot more I had to learn there, so I wanted to get a degree in it.
Mm.
And there's a greater earning potential, so that was a plus. Uh,
You
so I did
ultimately you're a
that.
pragmatist.
Yeah, so
Right.
I did that. Well, I tried to find things. Yes and no. I was always searching for whatever it was. I was always very adamant about choosing an area that really was fun,
Yeah.
something that I could really see myself doing and not getting bored with, that I could just have a fun time with. And computer science just happened to, if I'm comparing between two things that are fun and the other one pays more, then yeah, I'm going to go with that one. Uh, So yeah, I did my undergraduate degree there. I did a little bit of undergraduate research in computer graphics, games, um, and virtual reality a little bit. And
So
I was
so
yeah.
was that field of computer science pretty nascent at that time, or had it already been developed to where you felt like it was kind of a secure thing to go into?
Um, I don't know. I don't know. I didn't really think of it that way.
Yeah.
I just thought, hey, this would be some. This is really fun. I want to do this.
Yeah.
So I don't think I had like a real perspective on like the nature of, for example, the industry of virtual reality at the time.
But at that time, it
Right?
probably wasn't very like now. It's pretty commercially available and stuff. At that
It's a lot
time,
more, yeah. So at the time, there was kind of like, I mean, virtual reality has been around in some form or another since the 60s or the late 60s. Okay. But I'd say it became hot for a little while in the 90s,
mm,
but it never got to a point where it was commercially viable.
mm,
Not even close. Like the headsets back then were like, $50,000 to $100,000 a headset, so
mm,
way more than they are now. And it didn't really jump into the commercial realm until like the off the shelf kind of consumer realm.
mm,
I mean, there was a business around it, but it was mostly like government contracting and universities that were buying this stuff,
mm.
or big companies
Military
for
applications, that sort
yeah,
of thing. Yeah.
military, car companies, like Boeing and places like that.
Yeah.
Big companies. And then it got, in the 2010s, I guess it got democratized and a little bit enough to where it could there was another market for it, a wider market for it. Still, I'd say it's rather still kind of niche, I think, compared to say like cell phones or something, right? But
Mm-hmm.
um, anyway, where was I? Oh yeah. So, anyways, I did some of that stuff, and so at the end of that, and the end at the end of that, near to the end of my degree, I was trying to just figure out whether I wanted to go into like game development or I wanted to go to graduate school and become a professor. And I had a class and there's one of the classes that I took when I was an undergraduate with this guy named Bruce Naylor, and he was a guy that had spent a lot of time in industry for most of his career, and then had come back to like kind of teaching on the side, So he had a lot of connections
Mm-hmm.
in the industry, and we had this. It was like a elective class on like 3D. It was like 3D network game, or like 3D multiplayer game development or something like that. And but the coolest thing about it, well, I mean, it was a fun class, but the one of the nicest, best things that I got out of it was he would invite people from the industry that he knew to come and talk to us, like talk to the class. This is a class full of people that were basically trying to make the same decision that I was, because it was, I think I think that there was like another. You had to have taken his computer graphics class before you took that one, so everybody was like fairly serious about this, or at least thinking about it. And there's this one guy that came from he'd spent time. I guess he had been an employee of Electronic Arts for a long time, and he was so burnt out. I don't remember what his name was, but man, he was so burnt out, and he couldn't even hide being burnt out from this class full of like wide-eyed undergraduates that were super excited, potentially super excited about going into this industry. And at that point, I was like, yeah, I don't want to be that guy. So that's when I decided, like, okay, I'm definitely going to go the graduate school route and go and do the professor thing, because I already know that already seems really fun to me also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to get paid as much, but I'll get paid enough. I'm not exactly. I need to get paid enough to make a good living, but I don't need to get paid like a bajillion dollars. I don't really care. I care more about like having something that's fun and rewarding than I mean, but clearly, like, if the pay grade was a lot lower, then that would be a different situation. But yeah, like we professors complain about not getting paid, like at least in computer science, we don't get paid like they do in industry. They get paid way more than we do. But I mean, whatever. I live in San Antonio. It's not that high of a cost. I don't have to live in freaking California, where all the cost of living is ridiculous. And so yeah, I make a good enough living. It's fine. I don't feel like I need more money. Um, anyway, so then I went to the University of Florida, I guess, for uh, to do my graduate degree, my PhD. And my advisor there was Dr. Benjamin Locke, and he was doing virtual reality stuff. And I went and visited him before I accepted the offer and tried out some of his stuff. And I was like, yeah, this is what I want to work on. It was pretty clear to me at that point, and some of the other. I went and toured around other places too, but so I knew I wanted to do VR at that point. It was just a question of whether I wanted to do it in Florida or somewhere else. So I decided to do it in Florida. That was a great. I had a good time with that. Honestly, it was a lot of people. I feel like go to a PhD, and I always tell people, if you choose the wrong topic, or you choose the wrong. It's not the wrong. If you choose if you choose the wrong topic, you choose an advisor who you're just not going to work well. Not that they're a bad advisor, but they just might not. You got to get the personalities also have to mesh really.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you choose the wrong advisor, you choose the wrong topic. Yes, you can still get a PhD. It is not going to be fun, and it's going to take longer. And then you may not set yourself up with the type of you might not be able to set yourself up with what you really want to do after you get the PhD, because everyone's going to judge you as soon as you get a PhD. Everyone's going to judge you on what you did during your PhD, and that's what they're going to expect that you're the expert of.
Mm.
So yeah, VR was fun. I did kind of like virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality type stuff. Um, and I think my PhD was largely about it was a medical application. It was more of a
Anesthesiologist, I think, right?
anesthesiology, so training anesthesiologists
Yeah.
how an anesthesia machine works and how they would be able to troubleshoot problems if they were to have problems like in the middle of a procedure or something like that.
Mm.
Because it is kind of when you look at them, they are kind of a black box. Like you can't really see what's going on inside of them, so it's hard to create a mental model of that kind of thing. And all the gases you're dealing with and chemicals and things you can't just see. I
Mm.
mean, okay, you could probably crack open chemicals to see them, but you can't see the gases.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, I did that. That was fun. Um, then in 2009, I graduated uh, from from the University of Florida, and my wife. I was looking around for jobs. The job market wasn't for professors wasn't super great then. It was okay, I guess, but I didn't. There wasn't like a whole lot of places looking for the type of work that I was doing.
This was around
Uh,
the Great Recession.
yeah.
Mm.
So my wife was like, "Hey, you should apply for this one." She found the University of Texas San Antonio had an opening for software engineering.
Mm.
And yes, I have a computer science degree. I've never taken a course called software engineering in my entire life. Okay. So I was like, really? I don't know about that. But it said, software engineering and, anything else that, like an emphasis on software engineering, but anything else you can
Mhm.
apply. Uh, so I applied for that, and uh, they decided to hire me. And I think, I don't know exactly what happened with that, but uh, one of the classes that I could teach was the user interfaces and usability, which at UTSA is considered part of the software engineering like concentration.
Mhm.
So even though I wasn't really a software engineering like researcher, I could teach one of the classes, and they didn't have anybody to teach that at the time. So yeah, okay, it worked out. It worked out. Um, let's see. In some other weird things that happen. I guess I should tell you about other weird stuff that happens. So along the way, somewhere in like 2005, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So that was actually right at the beginning of my graduate school,
Mm.
or shortly thereafter starting graduate school. Uh, I had a lot of different symptoms over the years, but that I didn't really have any like really obvious symptoms until 2009. Like shortly after I started at UTSA, I started having like a lot of mobility problems. Uh, so that was annoying. Um, I went through a lot of, you know, all the different treatments and stuff, and didn't really do that much. I did a lot of rehabilitation, didn't really do that much. And actually, that was kind of instrumental for me because that whole experience was kind of instrumental for me because I thought, gee, how can I make this work better? How can I do this better? Is there something I could do to make this better, right? To make it more effective. So that's when I started thinking, okay, well, how can I apply virtual reality to rehabilitation? How can I make it better? I'm not the first person to have done that for sure. Um, but when I got started with it, and I want to say this was before, well, it was right around, actually, it was a few years before, like the whole, Oculus company happened, who were trying to do that. That was really the first company that tried to democratize virtual reality, and then they were later bought out by Facebook. at the time. Well, I guess they're called Meta now. But anyway, um, that was a little bit before that. It was a few years before that really happened. So I'd say in rehabilitation, there weren't a whole lot of people using. We were using there were some researchers using virtual reality, but it was mostly like either you're looking at a TV kind of virtual reality, or you are have a projector and it's projecting things. And from my perspective, it's like I really wanted to do it in a head mount because I thought the head mounts were just so fun.
Mm.
And that was really one of the reasons that I really enjoyed virtual reality is like that really immersive aspect of it. Like that feeling of where you were not you're in a different place, you might be a different person, like it's just the immersive aspect of it, which you just can't really replicate with anything besides a head mounted display.
And I think you talked about that a little bit with and I don't know if this is what kind of got you to that specific advisor that you had for your PhD or graduate studies, the pit experiment or the pit
Mm,
illusion, which was really like
yeah.
fascinating for you.
Yeah, so there's this famous experiment where and it's a really great example of the power of what virtual reality can do to people. So the idea is that you put a head mount on and you walk out on this like this basically this plank, and there's this pit that's beneath like this long drop,
Mm.
right? Uh, you and I remember when I was interviewing at uh, University of Florida. This was one of the demos that I saw. I had never done that one before, so this is one of the demos that they were running. And I put the head mount on, and I walked out on the thing. I remember Dr. Locke said something like, "Okay, now watch. He's gonna act like he's about to fall off the thing," and I was like, "Whoa!" Like exactly the feeling that he was saying I was gonna have. I definitely had.
Mm.
Like I had this feeling. I was like, "Whoa!" Like I felt like I was as though I was actually standing on a plank. I think physiologically, I had that same like feeling. Right? It's like if you were really standing on a high thing and you get like a kind of nervous butterflies in your stomach, kind
Yeah.
of your heart rate changes, you sweat a little bit, same kind of thing. And I was like, whoa, this is the most fun thing. I have to do this. I want to work on this. Um, Actually, years later, we when I was an assistant professor. One of the first things we did was a pit experiment, except we were doing it with people with multiple sclerosis,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to see, is that sense of immersion, how is that affected by having multiple sclerosis? Because the trick with multiple sclerosis is that, I mean, there's a lot of different symptoms around it, but one of the common symptoms is having balance problems, for one, but that's also potentially due to, well, for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is neuropathy. So you can't always tell where your limbs are in space if you
Mm.
close your eyes. Um, and your ability to control what you're doing, the sort of agency you have over your body in VR, is known to be something that affects your sense of immersion. So yeah, we did some experiments with like we had to go and I had to go and figure out how to do how to recruit. I guess one of the harder things about that was figuring out how to recruit enough people with multiple sclerosis. Uh, Eventually, we figured out that finding people from support groups was the easiest way to do it, and they were all very interested in helping us out.
Yeah.
Uh, and and they get a lot of new people a lot of the time.
So
Because the other problem with yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say the other problem with recruiting from specific populations like that, especially with multiple sclerosis, is that the symptoms are not the same for everybody. I mean, there are some symptoms that are more common than others. So, balance, spasticity,
Mm.
neuropathy, from the mobility side, that's or muscle weakness, also like all of that stuff. But also, there's a lot of cognitive uh, uh, symptoms that people have, and not everybody has both. I also had a lot of actually when I was originally diagnosed, I had like visual symptoms.
Hmm.
right? So I think the original reason I noticed something was weird going on, or at least something weird enough to make me go see a doctor about it, was that like one of my eyes got like I woke up one day and one of my eyes was like cloudy, not
Mm.
like blurry, but like
Hmm.
cloudy. It was weird.
Mm.
So that's what. So then I went in. They did an MRI and all that stuff. Um, and I had optic neuritis in both, like different eyes. I had, and I had, and that would have me develop blind spots for a little while in my eyes, and it messed up my color perception a little bit, not in like a clinically diagnostic kind of way. Like I wouldn't say that I'm colorblind, but I think probably there are certain shades of red that I can't see as well, or that I can't differentiate between as at least as well as other people can.
Mm.
Um, the oh, and I had double vision for a while. That was really annoying. Uh, Double vision, like, because I couldn't drive at that time because I had double vision. Because if you're driving when you have double vision, it looks like if you're on a two-lane highway, it appears that you are about to
Hit.
head-on collision
Yeah.
with everyone.
Yeah.
it's quite
That's
it's
terrifying.
quite disturbing,
Yeah.
and it was hard. Like I couldn't easily get it. Also, I mean, one thing you can do with that is, yeah, you just cover up one eye with an eye patch, but then or something like that. But then the problem is you don't have as good of a field of view. So that was doing it. So yeah, during that time I couldn't. I mean, I don't have that problem anymore, but I had it for a little while. Uh, let's see, where else was I? Okay, so then yeah, so then we were doing some research with people with multiple sclerosis, really trying to figure out. I spent a long time trying to figure out what is the experience like. What if you have multiple sclerosis? How does that change your experience with virtual reality? How does that change? Does it affect how virtual reality could benefit you or what it is useful for? Um, or at the same time, I was trying to figure out why is virtual reality not very accessible uh, for people with disability, people with balance impairments? Because I mean, when I was doing the pit study originally in Florida, you know, I could I could feel like, oh, it's messing. Like I feel like a little off balance just because that's how you would sort of feel if you were looking into a pit. But if I did that same, when I tried to do that same experience after I had mobility problems with multiple sclerosis, I would just fall over. Like I could not maintain my balance in VR, like standing up in VR, uh, unassisted. Like it was like impossible. It was almost like I thought it was kind of like one of the tests that they do in neurology to see how it's not a very good test, but they do it. Is called the Romberg test, where you close your eyes and they look to see whether you fall over or how quickly you will fall over, and then before you realize is you're falling over. Same kind of thing happens to me if I'm. It's not as bad as it used to be. I think I've sort of gotten used to it, but um, the same kind of thing happens if you're in a dark room.
Mm.
You can't
Yeah.
see. So basically, you learn to because you can't really trust your proprioceptive ability, your balance, your sense of balance is just kind of messed up. You tend to rely more on your uh, uh, visual sense. So if
Mm.
that visual sense is disrupted, or there's some illusion that is happening that is changing your perception of how you're balancing, then yeah, it'll mess up your balance. Um,
So I wanna go back real quick just to talk a little
yeah,
bit more about the whole experience of like being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and then kind
sure.
of navigating your graduate studies with that diagnosis. If you don't mind trying to put us or put me at least in your sort of headspace, was it like a
Yeah,
were you distraught? Was it something where you were you know, emotionally affected more than physical, maybe not more, but just as much as you were physically affected? Like how, just take me through kind of what that was like
yeah, sure.
as a young man kind
Um,
of navigating that.
so when I got diagnosed, I was already but when I got diagnosed, I was pretty sure I had MS
Mm.
because my sister has MS. So I already kind of knew what the symptoms were to look for. Um, I think that we had. strongly suspected that I had MS about a year before. So I'd say from an emotional perspective, by the time they diagnosed me, I had already kind of accepted that that was going to be a thing.
Mm.
And I think it probably helped. Uh, it probably helped a little bit that my sister had it, so I already kind of knew. At least I knew what to expect. I mean, like it wasn't something good to expect, but at least it wasn't. It didn't I didn't have to learn about what the disease was,
Mm. You weren't blindsided by it. Mm.
So because I already knew a lot about it, you know. I think, the biggest concern that I had when I was in grad school is I didn't really want people to know that I had it.
Mm.
Uh, because the tricky thing about MS is that there's a lot of different things that can go wrong, and I was afraid that people would discriminate against me, um, if they knew that I had MS. Now, I was lucky at the time. I'll say lucky. I don't know that it mattered actually, but at the time, it was easy for me to hide it because I didn't have any. I didn't have any outward symptoms. You know. Um, so yeah, all through graduate school, I would say uh, it was annoying, but it wasn't. It didn't really slow me down too much. Um, I honestly just stayed mostly at the time. Uh, I was mostly focused on my studies. But
Yeah.
uh,
Were you married at that time, or were you?
yeah, yeah, I got married in 2004.
Yeah.
But right between the end of my undergraduate and my graduate starting.
Mm. So you had
Uh,
your wife by your side, kind of helping you
I
navigate through
did,
those
and she
things.
already. I mean, my she's basically Dr. Google, but like in a very like correct way. That
Yeah.
is like she has died over the years. She has become an expert
Yeah.
on my uh, specific situation.
Yeah.
More so, and so usually her hit rate, her correct percentage rate is usually outperforms the doctors.
That's
So
awesome.
usually she'll be like, "This is probably what it is," and she's usually right. I mean, there's been times where she's not been right, but more times than not, I'd say that
Yeah.
she usually figures it out before the doctors figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's true with the doctors too. There are a lot of times they aren't right. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, what we learned over, yeah, actually, the thing is, like the first time I ever had a really weird health scare was actually in 2021, and that was when I had, well, at the time they called it idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, or
Mm.
ITP.
Yeah.
These days they would call it autoimmune thrombocytopenic purpura.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the time, that wasn't a thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they hadn't established at that point that I had any kind of autoimmunity.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, so she was with me during that. Like I've actually been with her since like my last, like since 1998, basically. 98, yeah, 98, 99, 99,
You were in
really.
high
Last two
school at
years.
that time?
Yeah, yeah, last 2 years of high school. I
So high
started
school
dating her in my
sweethearts.
junior year.
Yeah, that's great.
So, yeah. Haha, she got tricked.
No,
you know? But yeah, anyway, so
man.
she stuck with me through that.
Yeah.
Uh, that was that was a more dangerous situation because ITP was where your platelets get so low. My platelets got to the point where they couldn't detect them on the like they had to do like a manual count of them, and they're like,
Wow.
there was one time they're like, you have zero platelets, you need to go to the ER, and they were worried that I was going to sneeze and get an aneurysm or something.
Yeah.
It turns out we have learned since then that my even when my platelets are low, uh, my body tends to still clot pretty well. So I never had any problems with that, luckily.
Mm.
But anyway, eventually they figured it out that it was due to having H. pylori, at the time. So once they treated me for H. pylori, which was at that time was a really new crazy idea, but my dad was doing Google research, internet research, and found some cases of that happening in Japan, and that was like, I mean, that's like a really benign treatment. So it was like, yeah, sure, whatever, try it. Nothing else is working.
Mm.
You know, if this doesn't work, we're gonna cut your spleen out. I'm like, well, I don't want to cut my spleen out. So that worked. Um, the Yeah, but then MS happened, and I think graduate school was probably a rougher time for my wife than it was for me,
Mm.
really.
Because you
Because I
had
mean,
the
we moved.
studies to kind of take your mind off
Yeah,
of
like I
everything.
was like not. My head was elsewhere.
Yeah.
I was really focused on. I've got to get a PhD and finish this thing.
Yep.
The first couple of years of that, I think for her was really hard because, and I'm sure it was a lot. I think probably the MS diagnosis may have been harder for her than it was for me. The weird thing about diagnoses like that is um, like with me, I can feel it. Like I feel the effects of it. You don't always necessarily see it, but like I can feel that there are physical effects that I have
Mm.
from this disease. So it's like very real and obvious to me, right? And I mean it is to her too, but because she doesn't, because you can't have like that sort of first person feeling with it. It's like hard to process, like as to. Uh, so I think I don't know. That's my theory. I don't know.
No, that's
I think a
a
lot of times it is easier. I don't think that's just my experience. I think it
yeah.
is easier for like a disease like that, or maybe diagnosis in general. A lot of times, it's easier for the person that gets the diagnosis to sort of accept and understand and uh, deal with it more. I don't know, quickly, or it's easier to sort of come to terms with when it's like right there in front of you. There's nothing you can do about it.
Mm.
Whereas when it's a loved one, it's like you just feel helpless.
Mm.
And that's just a really that's just a really difficult feeling. Because it's like, I don't know. I feel like that's worse. Um, but anyways, yeah. That wasn't the greatest. I mean, I think I had a good time in graduate school outside of all of that stuff.
But that started to sort of shape how, I guess for some people maybe coming out of a PhD, depending on what they're doing, they may feel like they're in this sort of limbo state if they're, deciding whether they're going to go to industry or academia. You kind of knew you wanted to go the academia route, but this diagnosis and you dealing with multiple sclerosis sort of helped you narrow your focus to be like, I kind of want to focus on
That's
VR that's
definitely
going
true.
to be useful in rehabilitative applications and
That's
stuff.
that's definitely true.
Yeah.
I was One of the nice things about being in academia is you have a little bit more freedom as to what
Mm.
direction you can choose. I mean, academic freedom in computer science, at least, is, um, I mean, it exists, right? It's a thing. Academic freedom is a thing, although uh, you still have to somehow get somebody to give you money, right? So you still have to
I think
somehow
if
convince the
anything,
federal
computer
government.
science is one of those disciplines that really embodies that ethos of like do it yourself and the whole kind of renegade thing of, you know, I don't know. At least for somebody who's like an amateur in computer science, I don't know too much about it. I have some, CS 101, 201 data structures experience, but for somebody who like lives the computer science lifestyle, I think that seems to be like a unifying thing between most people who like computers is the whole idea of like making your own thing, programming your own thing, making your own reality, and that sort of,
That's
I think,
definitely a big draw of it.
yeah,
Yeah, you do. I will say, like from the perspective of programming, I mean that I always felt like it was when I tell my students like, oh, just be creative, like
yeah,
that freaks them out, okay? Because they don't when they think of creative, they think of like painting and art and music and stuff. Like
mm,
we don't, most of them, not all of them, but most of them are not super into that,
mm,
but. Uh, But I mean, I always kind of felt like programming was was a creative. It
Yeah,
was like you had the problem solving in general felt like uh, a creative task.
for sure.
Like it always felt that way. And I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed it. You know, because it was really something that's why it was that was one of the reasons it was fun. I've always been drawn to creative expression, and I kind of felt like programming was just another one of those kinds of things.
So
But yeah, I
dovetailing,
mean, basically, when you're a professor,
yeah,
you can't just do anything you want because you still have to keep
sure,
the lights on, right?
sure,
Like
sure.
I think professors in some ways are. I don't think the stakes are as high, okay, but professors are in some ways a lot like entrepreneurs. You have to, especially when you first start, it's almost as though the university has given you some seed funding, and they literally call it, or they call it startup funding. They
Yeah.
literally call it startup funding,
Mm,
right? So it's like it's almost like you have a startup, and you have to build this research program. You have to get the federal government to give you money to make it keep going.
mm,
You hire students to come in uh, to help you keep it going. Now the output, of course, is a little bit different because we're mostly just trying to publish papers, or we might put out open source software. Uh, we might go off and make an actual startup after that. But I'd say it's different, but it's the things that you do are different. But I'd say the mindset is actually rather similar.
mm,
Although I think probably a startup mindset is because the thing about a university is you have this umbrella, right? So the university itself is kind of an umbrella where, I mean, when you're an assistant professor, you've only got 5 years or something to prove yourself. But but on the other hand, you have 5 years. That's
mhm.
a lot of
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Like most people's contracts do not last that long. And
yeah.
so it you've got a pretty good amount of time, and usually people are very, at least at UTSA, they were always very supportive, you know, really trying to mentor young professors and get them up to a point where they can definitely get tenure,
Mm,
right? But yeah, you have to. So yes, you can kind of do whatever you want, but if you're smart, you'll do the things that you want to do that you can also get paid for and
mm,
publish pretty well.
mm, mm,
So I think I probably when I first started, uh, again, it's a little bit of a startup mentality. I gambled quite a bit on like, well, people aren't doing this, right? There's not a whole lot of support in the literature of people doing this kind of thing before. I don't know if the federal government is actually going to give me money to do it. So it was a little bit more like a build it they will come kind of thing.
mm,
And I mean that's kind of how it worked. I mean when you we built up some preliminary work with the money that the university let me start up my lab with. We I submitted some grants to NSF, the National Science Foundation. I managed to get a little one, and then it just kind of snowballed
snowball.
from there.
Yeah. So I want to try to get into that a little bit. We don't, unfortunately, I have like the basic version of Google, and I want to be respectful of your time too. I mean, I would love to talk for as long as you're able to talk for, but we only have 1 hour before this call ends. We can always start another one. But I kind of want to dovetail into, you were talking about it a little bit, and then I brought you back to MS in your graduate years and
Yeah,
stuff. But your research and your work at the SAVE Lab, the San Antonio Virtual Environments Lab, and I guess to start off, we'll start with a big question because I'm not sure how much more we can get in, but
sure.
thinking about virtual reality and augmented reality, mixed reality, all these sorts of things, with the advent of, like you were talking about, Oculus and Apple Vision Pro, and
Right.
and AI things like ChatGPT, which I'm sure will somehow be integrated into these sorts of things. For me, the ontological question of like the nature of reality, and this sort of ties back into what you were talking about with the pit experiment. That question of like, of the nature of what we're actually experiencing and our perceptions of it comes to mind. And I think it's a question that's plagued philosophers for quite some time. Plato's allegory of the cave comes to mind,
Yeah.
Baudrillard's simulacra and simulation, and Kant's idea of the noumenal, the thing in itself versus the phenomenal. As these technologies become more and more advanced, and as you play a part in that, in advancing these technologies and trying to tailor it to specific applications, like people with mobility issues or balance impairments. Um, what ethical considerations do you yourself take into mind when you're doing your work, or do you think that others who are involved in this field should take into work? I guess on a general note, or maybe specifically as it pertains to your work, tailoring it to people who have balance issues, and how do you, if at all, address those considerations? Sorry, that's kind of a long-winded question. Hopefully that made sense.
Okay. I will try to answer it in a way that I like to answer that question,
Yeah.
or that I've answered that. Well, I'll try to answer
So
the
you get it.
question.
You get it quite often, I guess.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like, so basically, uh, it's a double-edged sword in a way, right? Because, um, you know, a lot of the work that I had done was been with a very narrow population.
Mm,
Now, it just so happens that they are a pretty good example. Well, I should say they. We are a pretty good example of a type of population that was really not considered at all when when people are creating head-mounted displays, and that's one of the reasons why they really are not very accessible
mm,
to a very large. I mean, MS is a very small population with relatively to people in general that have balance impairments. But if you take people in general that have balance impairments, you have like 65 million people around, that at some point or another in their life, or or it could be chronic, uh, and basically none of those people were considered when you're creating these virtual experiences. So a number of years ago, I had a guy. I think this was maybe 2019, 2018. Maybe I had a student with muscular dystrophy come into my office, and he said, "I want to be able to play virtual reality." And I was like, "I want you to be able to play virtual reality too.
mm,
Like, tell me all of your problems, right?" And he was a computer science student. Um, and he talked about some of the issues that he had been having, and as we got to talking, we thought, there's not a whole lot of good reasons why VR can't be more accessible for people with lots of different kinds of disabilities. I mean, he was in a motorized. He was in a power wheelchair, and so he had a lot. His mobility and movement issues were a lot more severe than mine were. Right. So he would have had even more difficulty in a lot different. It was different, but in a lot of ways he would have more difficulty than I do. So we spent some time just going and talking to people in industry from various different sizes of companies and trying to figure out why is VR not accessible? Why? And what we ended up finding was we were hoping we wouldn't find that. Oh, actually, I think we thought we were going to find, well, there's no money in it. We thought that was going to be the answer. Maybe that really is the answer, maybe it's not. But at least from a developer perspective, I mean, they're not making the money choices really. Uh, they're like, wow, we didn't even know. Like, we didn't even think about it.
mm.
We didn't even know that there was a need for that, right? So it really becomes down to like it's really like an awareness kind of issue. Uh, so we did. There's another student that I had around the same time. It was around the same time, maybe a couple of years later, where we started doing like this disability simulation stuff. So basically, and what we were able to show is that if you can reduce you can very easily reduce someone's bias towards people with disability, even just they don't even necessarily know that they have this bias.
Mm.
Okay, like we call it implicit bias.
Implicit, right?
Does it actually affect behavior? Yeah, I don't know if it actually affects behavior. Okay, that's more research that we have to do, but it affects people's attitudes. And just by putting people in the shoes of somebody who has multiple sclerosis in a wheelchair, makes people, you know, less biased against people with disabilities. And so that was actually a pretty surprising result. We didn't think it would be that easy. Um, I still haven't figured out how to assess whether, it's an interesting result. Uh, if we put people in one of these simulators, one of our simulators, would it actually change the way that they interact or help or communicate with people with disabilities? I have no idea. I'm not advertising that they would. Uh, but that's actually an interesting research topic that I would, I would like to explore in the future,
Yeah.
especially like from a workplace education kind of standpoint, right? When you have people with disabilities in the same kind of uh, in the same place and working in the same space as people without disabilities, and they're working together. Uh, how can they best communicate? How can they best support each other? And so I think there's a lot more work to be done there. I mean, basically, the answer is um, ultimately we should take into account a wider variety of people when we are doing our research.
Mm.
Um, if you look at most of the research that has been done and development, research and development, if you look at most of the research and development that have been done on VR for the last 30 years, it has mostly been around a like well, actually, let's say since let's just talk about since the newest consumer wave of VR, right? It's mostly been focused on gamers who gamers actually a specific subset of gamers who are considered sort of hardcore gamers who usually fall into the variety of like white males who are like 18 to 35. I don't even remember what the demographic is, but it's actually like it's actually a pretty narrow demographic. uh and so they didn't even I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like they didn't realize that there was, I mean, from a money perspective, they didn't necessarily realize that there could potentially be a market there for a wider variety of people. So like maybe it was smart in the sense that, well, let's work on this market who we know will like this first, and then we'll expand it later.
Mm.
But and that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my research in some small way. Like, can we expand the use of VR to be able to be used by a wider population? Uh, I've been looking at people with disabilities, but there's a lot of people. I mean, the funny thing about VR also is that we're like, oh wow, $300 for a headset. That's a good deal. Like for those of us that when I did my PhD, our headsets were worth $40,000,
Mm.
right? It's like, oh, $300, that's not bad, but that's actually pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, for something that does the narrow thing that it does,
Mm.
right? Because you're not using it for like everything, like your cell phone, right? It's actually still pretty expensive in the
Mm.
sense that this is why you're not seeing it. Like I can do all kinds of great things with VR, but people in third world countries are not necessarily going to be able to
Yeah.
benefit from that because
Yeah.
they don't have the money to buy something that expensive. So I think we're still like, so even though we're like, oh yes, we've commercialized VR, which has made it available to a lot more people. That's true. I still think there's a lot of work to do. It still needs to be made cheaper, made better. It still needs to have better form factor. I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on the augmented reality side, so it's more integrated with actually the world that you're the world around you, so it doesn't completely block off the entire world. There's a time and a place for that, but not 24 hours, not 8 hours of your day. I don't. I thought it was kind of crazy when Meta was like, "Oh yeah, everyone's going to be working in VR." I'm like, "No,
Mm,
they're not."
yeah.
I study cyber sickness. We're trying to reduce cyber sickness. A ton of people get cyber sickness. Yeah, that's not going to work.
Mm,
And yeah, so I think they jumped the gun on that a little bit, a lot actually.
yeah.
But like, again, it's like it kind of comes back with cyber sickness is another good example of. I kind of look at it as an accessibility issue because uh, there's a lot of individual differences, and we really can't tell. We can't predict necessarily uh, whether or not, like before you get into VR, whether or not you're going to get sick or what kind of symptoms you're going to have. So there needs to be a more precision, kind of precise way for your own personal experience with VR. Uh, the way that we adapt that to an individual really needs to be adapted to each individual rather than like, oh, everybody needs a lot of people are going to need different uh,
Personalized.
solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, personalized.
Mm,
And at least the recent research that we have been doing in that direction is confirming that idea more and more, that one of the reasons that maybe we haven't really understood why is it that people get sick in VR for the last 30 or so years. Uh, there's been theories about it, but they all sort of don't agree. And my theory is that, well, it's just the answer is yes to all of the theories because it depends on the individual.
mm,
Uh, and so any solution that you have or any uh, reason why that's happening is maybe unique to that person. So we need systems that will adapt to them, and that's kind of what I'm working on right now in terms of cyber sickness and other aspects of VR. Just trying to make VR more adapted to the person, adapted to their environment, to where it can be accessible for more people.
mm. This is
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, I would really like to talk more about your research. I don't know what your time is like, but it looks like we're almost out of time on this call. You have to head out.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
got, I gotta,
Okay.
I gotta
No
stuff.
problem. So I guess
Yeah.
just as like a final word, um, if you'd like to, as a parting word, like say a piece of advice or something that's lingering on your mind or a favorite quote or something that you want to end with that you'd like to say. Piece of,
Mm,
something
okay. Okay.
memorable.
So, one of the things I don't know how to say this in like a good way. So you're relative. You can paraphrase me. That's fine. Uh, uh, no, we used to like to say like you should try. This is an old one though. Like make lemonade, make lemonade out of lemons.
Mm-hmm.
So when life throws you lemons, make lemonade.
Mm,
That's basically what I tried to do.
mm,
Like I got MS, um, and I tried to figure how can I use this experience of having MS to help the world in some way, right? Uh, so yeah, I think it's whenever you get something like that happens to you, I think it's also good to think about, well, how can this also be an opportunity? How can also this be? How can we also benefit the world from
mm.
this experience? So I
Yeah,
think I think that's a good way to live your. It also makes just living your life a little bit
yeah.
more positive, focusing on the silver linings of things.
Wise
So
words,
to speak.
Dr. Quarles. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to hearing about all the great stuff that you're doing and to staying in touch. It was a real
Yep. Thanks,
pleasure.
Ryan.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Yep. Thank you.
Take care.
See you.